Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining the DevOps Live Meetup. My name is Mike Rosato, and I'll be your host for tonight. And I'm one of the also the local organizers and of DevOps Days Dallas, and I just want to let everybody know, if you haven't attended in previous meetups, that the DevOps Days Dallas has been postponed till August 2021. But you don't have to be discouraged about that. There's plenty of other meetups. I mean, not only meetups, but DevOps Days conferences that are happening worldwide, and they're free. So, some are free, some are paid. So go out to our devopsdays.org website and check out, which events are available coming up soon. So, well, tonight we're going to have two special guests. I met them a few years ago. They are the authors of the Create Your Own Dojo book. And their names are, let me bring them in, is Joel Tosi and Dion Stewart. So let's bring them in. Hey, Joel, how are you tonight?
Good. How about you, Mike?
Doing great. And I got Dion here as well. How you doing, Dion?
Good. Hi, Mike.
Let me move these around here. Okay. So both Dion and Joel are very experienced people, coaches for dojos. And they wrote this book on creating your own dojo. So I want to kind of ask them tonight. Also, if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and feel free to send us your questions. You'll probably see it if you're using your telephone, your mobile phone. You'll see the questions. You could post your questions at the bottom. If you're using a website, you could post them on the right. Just post us your questions, and we'll get them answered for you. But I'm going to go ahead and start off by kind of asking both Joel and Dion, for those of you that don't know what dojos are, what is a dojo in your own words, at a high level? What do you consider dojo?
Yeah, so I think the simplest explanation is a dojo is a place where a full team comes to learn. They learn new skills while building their own products. There's a lot of nuances within that, right? So there's some organizations, we have to help them understand what a team is. Some organizations, we have to help them understand what a product is. But it's really that. It's really about a team that's bonded around a product or an outcome that wants to learn how to do things in a new way, and they learn and they practice it while building their product. What would you add to that, Dion?
I think that's a good definition at a high level. The word you mentioned right at the end there, practice, I think is a key component of it as well. So it's not just a place where you go for training. You will work with coaches, ideally coaches that are well aligned with the organization and what practices and skills the teams in the organization need to get better at. But it's also a place for practice. So you might work with coaches for a while to learn some skills, but repetition and really ingraining these new skills is a core part of the dojo. And it's what makes it different from kind of standard 2-day workshops and training classes where you might learn, but if you don't immediately apply that learning and practice it over and over after the course, a month later, you're likely to have forgotten 90% of it.
So, question, you mentioned different enterprises. So what type of businesses or enterprise can apply dojos to? The first time I heard it was a DevOps dojo. So, so what kind of businesses or enterprise would apply a dojo?
You want to start, Dion?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Mike, the first one started at Target. I think we can safely say Target. It's no surprise. Shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. There's Forbes articles, Wall Street Journal articles. They speak at public conferences. Anyway, so the first dojo started at Target. You're absolutely right, Mike. It started as a DevOps dojo. Part of the history is a Target employee went to a DevOps conference and saw a talk on developing DevOps Kung Fu. So the metaphor of that talk was, this is a skill. This is something you need to practice kind of the way you would practice a martial art. And from there, you can kind of see how Target arrived at the word dojo. Joel and I were lucky enough to be part of that. And I think one of the things Joel did right away early on was sort of push them to shift left, if you will, and not think of this dojo as just a place for learning DevOps, but a place where teams could learn kind of standard Agile process and technical skills, and maybe even shift further left than that and learn kind of design thinking, product discovery skills. And where we're at now is we encourage organizations to address as much of the entire value stream as they can inside the dojo.
Okay.
Oh, you want to go, Mike?
No, go ahead.
Well, I would say just to kind of add upon that. So, like, we kind of talk about going as wide in the value stream as possible. Target's the easy example, right? Kind of people can say, like, it makes sense if you're building, websites and commerce and applications. I kind of get that. We've also done really successful dojos with embedded systems, auto manufacturing, which I think is really interesting because, this is organizations where, like, there's a high cost. You can't experiment on an engine. You can't say continuously deploy the engine. It actually has to be built. But we can still take some of these practices and talk about how do you do modeling and how do you do testing of these things so that you reduce the cost of being wrong. And so we talk about these kinds of ideas. We've done it in healthcare. We've done it now with some other groups, financial spaces. I mean, it's a pretty. I think the sense it is at the root of it, it's just about learning and being intentional with your learning. That kind of applies to a lot of domains.
Yeah, that's great. You talked about space, a space where people go to learn and stuff. And an interesting question came up from, I'll bring it, post it up real quick, from my friend Tom here. He talks about, how would you do something like this remote? Because we're going through this pandemic, and everybody's, usually working remotely from home. So this is a very good, valid question.
Yeah, it was. So I'll answer this. I'll start to answer, but I want to expose my bias first.
Okay.
Full transparency. So I was, I would say Dion is probably in the same boat. I was largely against distributed dojos, remote dojos, prior to COVID for a variety of reasons. And usually those reasons were stemmed in the fact that just large organizational dysfunction. It's easier when teams are sitting next to me for me to sit up next to somebody and say, hey, remember that testing we're going to do? Yeah, we're going to do it right now together. It's an easier thing to do. When people are remote, they just hang up on me. And so I was worried about that. I was worried about people not showing up because, they could easily be distracted. It's harder for people to get pulled out of the dojo. I don't see managers pulling people out physically very often. Remotely, I was worried that the organizational kind of inertia would take over. So that's kind of my bias. What we've learned in the past few months, we were lucky enough, we brought in Woody Zuhl. He taught us a lot of great things around how do you work remotely and how do you collaborate remotely and how do you kind of create space for people to express things. And so Woody's been wonderful with us. The long story short, the team experience has been pretty good. We have to use different tools. We use different techniques. The same kind of overall focus, though. We talk about what we want to learn, how we're going to get there. We do a lot of sharing and repetition. And so that's worked pretty well. The drawback is a lot of the, I think Dion even calls it serendipitous moments. When you have a physical place, you get a lot of these moments that you can't, where teams start sharing across their domains. We just can't we haven't figured that out yet remotely. What would you add to that, dude?
Yeah, just to expand on that last thought a little bit more, it's very similar to going to an online conference these days, right?
Right.
You don't have the hallway conversations. You don't run into friends or people you might have worked with previously. and say, what session are you attending, and what are you interested in. There isn't that opportunity for the things that aren't happening kind of in the Zoom meeting or WebEx or whatever the platform is, right? There are some attempts at trying to create virtual environments that have some visualizations where you can kind of see, oh, here's a cluster of people, and if you hover over it, you can hear the audio. You might even be able to see video if there's some kind of screen sharing happening. But there's a question of creepiness, right? Like, we feel safe if we're in a Zoom meeting with other people. We kind of trust that the security is such that we're the only ones in the meeting.
Right.
But if you knew that anyone could sort of be eavesdropping at any point in time, that's not exactly fostering any kind of feeling of psychological safety, right? So we're trying to figure out if there is something that could be done in a virtual sense that does sort of emulate that larger space where multiple teams are working together. And you can kind of foster those peer-to-peer learning moments.
Right. How does time zone come into play in all this?
It's pretty crazy. I'm actually playing hooky from a dojo right now, where we've got some people in California, and then we have another group of people that are 14 hours ahead of them, or actually 14 hours ahead of me. I'm on the East Coast. We have 2 hours of overlap a day. So we're working with the people in California for a couple hours, then 2 hours of overlap, and then some additional time with the people in the other time zone. So does that work really well in a dojo? Not exactly in terms of supporting full team learning. However, I'll say this. If you think about the dojo being a place for teams to improve their skills, kind of a new skill that's been foisted upon us lately is, how do we collaborate in this remote world? Yeah. How do we work across time zones? Which that problem probably existed before COVID, right? But I think one of the things we're doing with this organization is, it's early on with them, but we're sort of exploring what is the right balance between sort of synchronous in the dojo communication. What's the right balance with asynchronous? This is a skill. People need to learn how to work in this environment. And the question is, can we leverage the dojo to help with that?
Gotcha. I got another question here from Tom. It has to do with the amount of people.
If a person has 1,000-person IT company, is that too small for a dojo? Wow, I've done dojos for much smaller companies, so I would go to say no. The only thing, so I would. I mean, I met Tom a few years back. If he's on, I don't think he'd be too challenged by this. I mean, just because the size of the IT is 1,000, there's probably larger kind of total number of people that would go through a dojo. We've had groups where, HR's come through, L&D groups, marketing's come through. So it's much bigger than that. The other thing that's interesting about that, we're too new at dojos to know when they're done. But if you take the dojo at its core as just this idea of we're continuously learning and experimenting, I don't know if that's ever really done. I think the dojo might change, so even if you had a dojo and all 1,000 people went through it, if there was nothing new to learn, then shut down the dojo. But my guess is something has changed because, man, this technology is moving, ideas are moving, products are moving. There's just so much happening that
a lot of innovation.
If we just embrace this idea of like, this is a place where we kind of come and learn and try new things and just kind of go crazy, I don't know if it ever stops.
Yeah, and in some of the dojos we've been in, we've seen teams come through a couple times, right? Usually there's a fairly long time span between the two visits, but that's happened. It's kind of weird though, because the part of the goal for the dojo is helping teams learn how to incorporate learning into the way they work. So if we are truly wildly successful with a given team, in theory, they would never need to come back in because they would have adopted a learning style of working, right? Like, how do we incorporate learning along the way? Having said that, we all know what it's like to work in organizations. There's always sort of more product ideas that you have time for. And there's always new technology. Technology is evolving more and more rapidly. So the opportunity, again, to practice, to sort of get a break, to get pulled out of your normal working environment and be given the space and the time for learning. We often say dojos are about learning over delivery. It is delivery in the context of your real world, or learning in the context of delivering your real world work, but the focus is learning. It could be something that is around for a long time.
Yeah,
gotcha. I should have made Tom my co-host here because he has a ton of questions, which I'm loving.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, is this, maybe we should have just scheduled a call with Tom. But yeah, these are all good questions. I'll start with this one first. Absolutely, you can rotate team members as coaches. Even longer term, not everyone wants to become a full-time coach. And what some organizations have done is sort of rotated people through, especially your more senior technical people. It's not uncommon for dojos to be staffed with coaches with different skills. So in several places we've been, there's someone who knows Agile and maybe product, and they coach alongside a technical coach on, for a single team. They kind of pair up and coach together. Particularly in the technical coaching area, I think that's where you're likely to see this rotation happening. The really strong technical people I know, after a while of coaching, they just kind of get to this point and they say, I just want to go build something for a little while. Mm-hmm. I'm open to coming back at some point, but I want to go build something.
It's almost like a pay it forward type of concept where you're learning something new, and then now you become the coach. You're going to teach some other people new stuff. It's like kind of that pay it forward type of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to this question is be careful and be aware that you don't want to have a team, and the team has 5 different coaches, and they change every day, kind of a thing. Because usually what's going to happen is the coach is building context with the team, and you don't want the context to be broken. Well, like you don't want the coach to come in for 3 days and be like, why are you doing that? That makes no sense. You should, but it's because they lack the context of a decision that happens, a day before. The context, the decisions happen so fast in the dojo that's the one thing I'd be careful with.
So is there like a period of time that would be recommended for coaches to be in a dojo? Because there's a period for the dojo itself.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So I would tell you that if I have a team, so teams are really usually with us for 6 weeks. If I was going to rotate somebody in and out, I mean, ideally, I would have 2 people with that team, at least to kind of grow context, and maybe one person peels off after 3 weeks and one person kind of like, they kind of hand off that way. Gotcha. I don't know if I would do something where it would change too drastically for that team's experience. What would you say, Dion?
I agree with that.
Yeah. That's where it gets. I've seen another model where, and this worked out pretty well, where there was a team or a coach that was consistent for the full 6 weeks with the team. And they would bring in kind of specialists, like Dion mentioned, for like 1 or 2 day things every one. Yeah, we want to coach complete an engagement. Yeah. You want a coach to be there for the full time. I've seen a coach bring in specialists, as needed to a team. But usually what would happen in that scenario is, like, say a team had a question around, this team was doing a lot of Terraform stuff. And so it was about Terraform and a SQL Server database. And so the Terraform expert was going to come in the next day. Well, what the coach did is the day before the day before the specialist came in, they spent an hour with the coach and kind of said, hey, this is kind of where the team's at. Let me give you context about how we got here. These are the things we tried that didn't work. Just so the coach doesn't come in, or the specialist doesn't come in and say, well, you're all idiots. Why, the coach has to spend time kind of getting the specialist ready, and so you don't want to finagle that around. I don't think it's been a good experience for the team.
Gotcha. Here we go, man. Tom is burning.
Tom's on fire.
Oh, Tom's on fire now.
You have a hard time finding coaches. Yeah. So every organization is having a hard time finding coaches. I think what's interesting is we did this little conference for organizations that were doing dojos last year, and we were lucky enough to have Kent Beck join us, and he was talking about when he's coaching and he's trying to create moments and create opportunities for people to learn on their own. It's similar to what we're doing in the dojo, and he says that's one of the hardest things he's had to do. And I think that's what's hard for a lot of coaches is, especially in this dojo space, the dojo space isn't so much about giving answers. Somebody says, what's the JSON? I need to type in here. That's not interesting. We're trying to create these moments where they can learn something and they can figure out how to learn on their own and they can figure out how to ask the questions. I think that's the challenging thing for a lot of to find coaches is that you're trying to find people that aren't there. We're trying to find people that are coaching learning and not coaching process or not coaching answers.
Kind of teaching them how to fish.
Yeah.
Teaching them how to fish there.
Yeah.
Mentioning this about something that came to my mind is that he mentioned is hard about finding coaches. There's I heard about a dojo consortium. Those dojo consortiums, are they local, worldwide? Can you invite people from those consortiums to help with the coaching as well?
So the Dojo Consortium is like it's about 35 companies, 40 companies. Dion, what would you say? It's open to new companies. There's no prerequisites so much as you have to be interested or trying to do a dojo or running your own dojo. It's a nice group. They meet, I think, every other week. They have a website. They have a Slack channel. It's really it's not Dion and Joel kind of like saying, hey, come talk to us. It's really companies sharing their ideas, talking about coaches and talking about coaching and talking about dojos and those kinds of things.
It's like a community.
It's a community, yeah. That's a nice way of putting it. And that's actually why Dion and I try to stay out of it, is because we don't ever want it to be about, not that we're that interesting, but we don't ever want it to be about Joel and Dion. We want it to be about the community kind of connecting together. But they talk all the time about trying to find coaches.
Is this a worldwide community of consortiums, or is this are these all local in the U.S. or?
It is worldwide. I mean, the vast majority of participants are from the U.S. And just to be clear, we did not start this.
Right. What
happened? The first three companies that used this model were Target, then Capital One, and then Verizon. And some of the Verizon folks had this idea to do a couple time a month check-in with people from Target and Capital One and just share information. What's working, what's not working, what are you trying, et cetera, et cetera. And that has grown, as Joel mentioned, into about 35 to 40 companies. This event that he mentioned, we had a Dojo Consortium Conference in 2019. And that was just based on, Joel and I put on another event. A couple of people from Verizon and Target attended and said, it'd be really cool if we did something like this for the Dojo Consortium. And again, the whole point of that event was to bring in some speakers, but a lot of it was open space and, again, sort of foster building this community. Joel and I are constantly sort of trying to walk this tightrope between making sure we're gainfully employed and also fostering a community around this, because it's a model for learning and helping organizations improve that we think works really well.
Gotcha. Yeah. And Tom says that he's spoken to Roger before from Verizon. He needs to follow up with him on that.
Yeah.
But here, Tom has another great question here.
Does anyone besides Tom have a question?
We love Tom, yeah. But anybody that wants to post your question, post them out there. If not, it'll be co-host with Tom Sweets.
There you go. the base skills for teams, that's an interesting one. You know, I don't think you need a base level of Agile to come into the dojo. I mean, in full transparency, I've seen some teams that have a base level of Agile, and the first week is just like, oh, that's not Agile. Sometimes that actually hurts. But I think there's a base set of skills. If you're trying to build cloud native apps and you bring in a team from the mainframe, it might be a little bit big of a step. We might want to have them go through some, foundational stuff before they come into the dojo. Just kind of awareness, those kinds of things. But I mean, I've had plenty of teams that had no Agile experience or no DevOps experience or no testing experience come into the dojo, and they learn it kind of in the moment. It's even more interesting when you have a team that hasn't learned Agile, and then after 4 weeks, they ask you, they go, somebody's talking about this Agile stuff. Are we going to learn that in the dojo? And then you say, well, what have they told you? Well, they do these stand-ups, and you kind of look at them, and then their light bulbs go off. They go, oh, we've been doing this all along, haven't we? Yeah, we have. We just didn't worry about, calling it names and calling it certain things. Anything you want to add to that, dude?
I would just say, yeah, we do sort of a very stripped down, sort of essential Scrum style of Agile in the dojo usually. I say usually because if a team is doing Kanban or the organization is really geared around safe or something like that, we'll try and adapt the dojo to fit the needs. But sometimes even in those cases, we'll sort of set that aside and just do this essential Scrum. One of the reasons we set it aside is because we do 2.5-day sprints in the dojo. So I don't know if we've mentioned this so far, but the model that evolved at Target that we've used at a lot of other places is a 6-week experience model. And we do 2.5-day sprints. And if you think about it, obviously do the math, that's 12 sprints in a 6-week time period. And to Joel's point, just by kind of going through the 4 standard practices, the sprint planning, the daily stand-ups, some kind of review, and then a retro, we're doing all that twice a week. We're doing it for short periods of time, but we do stress with teams that, hey, look, I know we're just planning the next 2.5 days, but yes, we really do want you to plan an amount of work and deliver it and really finish those stories, get them done in 2.5 days. We've had many teams say to us at the end of that 6-week time period, boy, we really thought we knew what Agile was, but by going through the discipline of doing this twice a week, we feel like we really understand it now. I'll make another couple points here. As Joel mentioned, usually we're not stressing the Agile process improvements that teams are going to make in a dojo. It's more technical practices and sort of the early part of the value stream, the product practices usually. But one of the things we do with every organization that we help set up these dojos in is a bootstrapping process where we're really looking at what the organization's goals are, what are the metrics that they either need to establish a baseline on and start reporting, or they're already capturing to tell them whether they're hitting those goals, those outcomes. And then we have a fairly lengthy conversation about where they think the organization is and what practices are going to move the needle on helping them achieve their goals, right? So it's not like there's a standard curriculum or a standard set of practices that we apply in every single organization. To make this a little more concrete, some organizations we've done this in have cloud transformation efforts underway, right? They're moving to AWS or GCP or Azure. Other organizations are still totally on-prem. So it's not about moving to the cloud for them. Obviously, there's going to be completely different sets of practices in those two contexts. So I hope this is answering Tom's question a little bit. All this stuff is interrelated, right? So it depends. It depends on what we want the teams to learn. It depends on what the organization's goals are. It depends on where the teams are at with these skills in the organization at any one point in time. All of that is work we try to take organizations through very intentionally before they set up a dojo. it's a big investment, right? So you want to make sure you get it right. You also don't want to be in a position where if you do get funding for a dojo and stakeholder buy-in, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, you're in a meeting and someone says, okay, so what's the value we've achieved with our dojo? What's the ROI on it? And you're sitting there going, I don't know. People like it. The surveys are coming out well. There needs to be something a little more concrete.
Something more substantial.
Yeah.
Michael Collier made a comment here. I don't know if he meant that for me not to push for questions or dojo is more of a guided thing and not a push, I think is what he meant. But if he wants to elaborate more, he can just put it out there. And let me bring up another question here.
Yeah, this gets into kind of what I was just mentioning a little bit, right? So, in terms of specific DevOps metrics, there's sort of the standard for that the Accelerate book talks about that a lot of organizations use. But we also usually push to have, again, it's context specific and it depends on the org's goals. But we're usually pushing for metrics that go well beyond DevOps, right? So metrics related to products. The DevOps metrics will tell you a lot about how you're doing on the delivery side. They don't necessarily tell you anything about whether or not your customers are finding your products useful. If you can reduce your cycle time for delivery from 40 days to 7 days, that's great. But if you're just continuing to push out new features in your product that aren't being adopted, the problem wasn't really the DevOps capabilities at that point, right? And again, the metrics need to be tied back to the specific goals that the organization is trying to meet, and the practices ideally are going to move the needle on those metrics. And absolutely, you want to get those metrics established and get baselines established before you start bringing teams in.
Yeah. Like the cycle time is great, like you're saying, if you reduce it, but if you're not using it to figure out if you can experiment better, if you're not using it for good things, Dion talked about shifting left and kind of going wide in the value stream. I mean, that's why we talk about all these things being contextual. It's cool to have better instrumentation and better telemetry and better monitoring, so long as we're using that to kind of feedback into the product side so we can understand the product better. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about. We're trying to make people's lives better. And so it sounds maybe hippie-ish, right? But the best metric is, are our customers happier? Are we making their lives better? If we're pushing out more McDonald's French fries, I don't know if that's helping anybody.
Yeah, and like both of you said, this necessarily doesn't mean that dojos are for DevOps or for actual development. People can use dojos for finance, and their metrics and ways of doing things may be totally different.
Yeah.
Healthcare the same way. They could be totally different type of metrics that they're using and things that they're learning on.
Yeah, we know of a company in the Dallas area there that we met some people through that reached out to us to learn more about this model, and they're applying it for marketing teams. So that's been an interesting observation. And I think Target is doing some of that as well. So Target was the first. Their dojo's been around, 6-7 years now. And they've been creative with it and have figured out how to build these learning experiences for teams throughout the entire organization at this point.
Yeah, because it's more of a continuous learning type of experience.
Yeah.
One thing that Tom mentions here about too much to learn, I think and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, but dojos is not to throw everything under the sun that you want to get learned into one dojo, because that would be kind of overwhelming for everybody in that dojo.
It's do you want to go first here, Joel?
Yeah, I mean, so it would be too. There's a couple of things here. One, it would be too much. So we always try to make sure that the learning goals are achievable, and they're also tied to this kind of something. So we had a group early on that wanted to learn Kafka, And so first when they came in, they wanted to learn everything about Kafka. How do I set up partitioning and sharding and all these kinds of things? And it's like, well, hold on. Give me context around how that's going to help you. Well, I don't know, but I know I should know how to do these things. It's like, well, so so we try to bring context to the things, so we learn just, I don't want to say just enough, but it's not that we're not trying to make everybody an expert in everything. We're trying to make it relative to what they're trying to do and what they need to be successful, and kind of help them understand how to learn. So there's that aspect of it. There's also, like, in a lot of organizations, we try to help the organization establish patterns. So if everybody is doing certain kinds of things, then we want to help them create like an inner sourcing model where teams are sharing things and teams are sharing patterns and practices. So not everybody has to be the Kubernetes expert. They can rely upon patterns that other people have established, and now they just have to have enough understanding of how to use it versus how to do everything. So we're trying to do team learning just enough, contextual, organizational learning, double loop kind of learning stuff. Otherwise, it's just too much. To create a dojo, you must first create the universe kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and how, I guess, I know you mentioned that you're dealing with some people in California and others in Australia and so forth. Has this kind of concept of dojo kind of caught on, elsewhere? Is there other groups like in the Far East doing this?
So this particular model, I know for sure it's in Europe and in India at this point. The other thing I would add, though, is it's not the same model, but the concept of a coding dojo, being a place where you go to practice and do katas, exercises. Those have been around for a long time. Emily Bache has an excellent book out on coding dojos and a really sweet GitHub repository with example katas and multiple languages and things like that, right? So we're not the first ones to use this metaphor of a place you go to learn and practice to improve your skills. But yeah, like I said, for the most part that I'm aware of, it's companies in North America, Europe, and India.
In Australia.
In Australia now. And there's someone on that team from New Zealand. So I guess we could, we've got one person in New Zealand. So
we just need Antarctica now.
Let me see. I had another question here. Let's see if I can find it. I know there was so normally when you're setting up these dojos, normally you tend to have like a single company would be the best, or do you usually have multiple companies coming in at the same time to a particular dojo and learning from each other?
Usually it's single company.
Single companies.
Yeah, there have been some of the companies that have launched these very successfully internally. There have been some efforts where they've offered it as a service to other companies, like in their locale. And, I think that's valid. As Joel talked about earlier, coaching teams for learning is a little bit different than coaching for delivery. And, having people who understand the structure, understand how to guide teams through kind of an intake process and do the coaching and that, that is valuable. So that can be effective. I don't think I would launch a dojo as a multi-company effort from the get-go, unless I was very convinced that the specific practices and skills that those companies were trying to achieve there was a lot of overlap.
Right. Or they could share their experience, like you said, with like the consortium. Through Slack and other methods.
Exactly. And one of the things that the consortium has talked about, I don't know if actually anyone has followed through and done it, but they've talked about rotating coaches around. Kind of sharing coaches and be a learning experience for the coaches themselves, as well as obviously they'd be bringing in a different perspective when they're visiting a different organization.
And that's such a beautiful idea, man.
Yeah, it is.
I hope
I'm thinking, especially if there's different types of businesses, like, you have somebody from finance, healthcare, and development, where they share those experiences around.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what Michael says there, that, the guide not to push was around coaching, guide to an outcome, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I got another question here from Michael Robinson again. Here we go.
How much curriculum preparation is appropriate? That's an interesting question. I'll have to. So when I read the question, my interpretation of the question is, if I'm starting in a new dojo, how much time or how much effort should I spend preparing either content or material or getting prepared for teams? So if my interpretation is wrong, Michael, please let me know. So there's two things there. One is, it's good for the company that's starting the dojo to align around what the impacts they want the dojo to have. And so I think that's critical. This is the impacts we need to see it have. And from there, they could align around the practices and the things they want to teach that they think will help lead to those kind of outcomes. That's a critical step. But beyond that, I don't know if I would spend that much time creating curriculum. A lot of the stuff that there's two things there. One is we don't create a curriculum because every team, where they're at and where they start is going to be a little bit different. So it's hard for us to create a curriculum that would make sense. And then one thing that I'll attribute to Woody, he said a lot of times that, we don't know the work we need to do reveals itself while doing the work. A lot of times the things we need to learn reveal itself while we're learning. And so, like, if we try to create a curriculum, I think we would rob ourselves of that spontaneity that says, I didn't know this. And so, like, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is helping teams learn to learn and kind of reveal what they don't know. So coming back to it, definitely invest in time in the outcomes you want to get and the things you want to teach to get there, but not so much the content or the curriculum that's going to be delivered.
Right.
The learning goals are defined by mostly the team with some guidance from the coach every step of the way. Yeah. So there's a process we do before the team comes in called chartering. It's usually about a half-day event, and that's where we're establishing the initial set of learning goals and defining success criteria for the dojo, so that if the team were to go through the dojo, at the end of the 6 weeks, if we achieved all that success criteria, everyone would be happy, right? But it's not like at that point, we say, well, on day 3 of week 4, this is the lesson plan, right? The lesson plan is evolving as the team is going through the dojo, kind of in the moment, as Joel mentioned. Having said that, if we are working where teams are kind of addressing as much of the value stream as they can and they're going wide, the first few days of the first week at a minimum, oftentimes the entire first week, are spent on kind of product discovery, design thinking practices. So it's not like it's a free-for-all from day one every time. There is a structure, there is a basic flow. So a lot of the times we'll do product discovery in that first week. If the team needs to do work on their CI/CD pipelines, we might do value stream maps of kind of the current as is and what they view their ideal to be pipelines would be, and that will generate some additional work. And basically then we create a backlog and we just start working on that backlog. We work slowly. So to one of Thomas's other questions earlier about there being too much to learn, it's often the case, and often during chartering, we kind of get to a point where we say, whoa, we've got a lot to learn here in a 6-week time period. Maybe we need to prioritize this a bit. But I do think one of the other effective things about the dojo is how much can be learned. So let's say a team wanted to come in and They want to learn how to build microservices using 12-factor app methodology. Again, we would still start with that product discovery work to make sure the microservices are couched in real product context and it's not just a technical exercise. And then we would start building one, or at least start building, a call on the first one. But in doing that, we're going to ensure we're doing automated testing, most likely. We're building out the pipeline as we go. We're talking through the various elements of 12-factor app as we're building that, and kind of whatever other technology learning is appropriate. Is it on AWS or on-prem or all of those kinds of things. So we do slow down, right? There's a definite intentional slowing down to make sure all of these things can be absorbed. And once we do one, we do another one. And we do it, again, with the very slow, intentional focus on learning sort of pace of delivery.
Right. So you mentioned 6 weeks of a dojo. Has there been anybody that have maybe brought very small projects into a dojo and say, we want to do this very small project? They start off the 6 weeks and they feel like it doesn't give them enough time, and they may be extended another 6 weeks?
So it's really common for teams to start a project and finish it after the 6 weeks.
Gotcha.
I would say it's more the norm that they finish it outside the dojo than stay for an additional length of time. And again, that's sort of the goal of the dojo. Can we foster this learning? Can we help teams learn so that they can proceed on their own and they don't, quote, need to stay in the dojo? There have been times where teams have asked to stay, and usually sort of the assessment, for lack of a better word, at that point is, well, where are you at with the learning goals? Like, if there's still some learning goals that we haven't achieved and we think we could achieve those in another 2 weeks, then maybe we extend. Extending for a whole second set of 6 weeks, it's pretty extreme. I think it would be pretty rare that we would ever go that far, along. Some of this depends on scheduling and timing. How much of a pipeline do you have, a backlog of other teams, if you will, that want to come in? Is there space in the dojo for the teams to stay? In this new virtual world, space is not a problem usually. You're more constrained by the number of coaches you have available to work with the teams, right? But all those things will come into play.
Right. We did have one team, ironically enough, in Texas that wouldn't leave the dojo. but that was more or less because, I think it's funny, but I think this happens in a lot of organizations, is like the dojo was the first time they got to work as a team. And so they knew that if, as soon as they left, like the coaches just kind of hung out with them every once in a while, but the team knew that as soon as they left, they were going to be in 4 different floors around 6 different buildings in a campus. And they knew they weren't going to see each other, and they were concerned that they weren't going to get anything done. So they just said, "Can we just stay here? You can leave us alone, but can we just kind of stay here and don't tell anybody?" Yeah, that's fine.
I know that with everything being working from home, it's kind of hard. But when you're working in a dedicated space, has there been times where you've had like 2 different dojos going simultaneously, and then each one of these dojos kind of helping each other out as well?
Oh yeah, it happens. I'd say more often than not. Sometimes we try and pull it along. I had a team up in Detroit, a team that was doing embedded systems, kind of auto manufacturing. So they were doing modeling and hardware, and they were. That was one team, and then the other side of the wall was a team that was doing cloud deployments, kind of infrastructure as code, kind of building patterns for the organization to use. And all this, so you think those 2 teams probably not gonna do a lot, but they kept on hearing each other talk about things, and they said, they kept on wanting to learn more from each other, and so it was just this nice thing that it just happens, like two wildly different domains with different constraints. Because they were there together, they just realized that they had more in common than they thought they did.
Gotcha. Definitely interesting stories, to hear, especially that happens, in other places like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anybody else that wants to throw out a question. I mean, we have a few people viewing. We have like six people left there viewing. If anybody has any questions, burning desires, ask them now. Otherwise, if you haven't seen or read Dion and Joel's book, it's one of the best sellers on Amazon. From how you take it, very good selling, and it's very good reading. I mean, it's not huge book. It's enough to get you going. So if you haven't, go out and reach it. I really want to thank you guys for joining me. I know this is tough. Let me see, no more.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thomas, you've been a great co-host. I'm telling you, we're gonna have to hire you for a co-host next time. He's always burning with desires, eager to learn. Yeah.
Thanks for getting it.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
Yeah, definitely good.
Yeah,
stuff.
and definitely join the consortium. If you need help getting connected, email Joel or I.
Your DMs on Twitter are open, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and I posted here their Twitter handles are Joel at Joel Tosi and at Dion Angelo. So go out if you have any questions. Where's the is there the Slack channel for the consortium?
Yeah, and I it just got moved. Not that that's real relevant, but it's basically dojo-consortium.slack.com.
Yep.
Okay.
And that just happened this week. I'm not sure what the sort of application process is. There is also a mailing list at Groups.io.
Yep.
And that's just Dojo Consortium at Groups.io.
Okay. If you send that to me, I could put it in the meetup, on the same meetup for you guys, and we'll post it out there. That way people can get to the Slack channel and how to get to the newsletter or whatever they have, and just follow them and try to get more involved with the consortium, because I understand it's a great group of people that it's a community base, and they help each other out very much a lot.
Yeah, I mean it's got a fancy title, but it's not a consortium from the standpoint that it's like a paid membership kind of thing. Right. All the people within it are people inside of organizations trying to affect change in their orgs, trying to figure out the best way to do it. They're all really passionate. They care about people. They care about learning. It's a great group. It's a great community.
Yep,
that's awesome. It's a tongue twister for me because I'm my Spanish. So, yeah. Okay, so thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me, and thank you for the people that stayed on watching, and we'll see you at the next meetup in a couple of weeks. Okay, we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Take care.